Welcome back to Coach Hall Writes. In today's video, we're going to be talking about how to avoid vague wording in your essays. These tips are going to help you not only elevate the content of your essay, but also improve your style. And while most of my videos are specifically geared toward AP Lang students, technically these tips can apply to other types of writing as well. Speaking of AP Lang students, if you happen to be an AP Lang student, I would love it if you would hit that subscribe button and also turn on your notifications. That way you won't miss any future AP Lang related content as you're preparing for your exam. Also, if you're a TikTok user, please go ahead and follow Coach Hall Writes on TikTok as well. The first tip I have for you as far as avoiding vague wording in your essays is to actually be mindful of demonstrative pronouns. So the demonstrative pronouns are this, that, these, and those. The pronoun it can also be vague at times as well. When I first started teaching, I wrote notes on my students' papers saying that they needed to add a noun after the word this. And they were like, oh, is that why our teacher last year would always write this what with a question mark as his feedback? And the answer is yes. So basically, we want to understand that pronouns replace nouns. And so we need to figure out what the antecedent is. So when you're saying this, what are you actually talking about? So I'm not telling you that you can't use the word this. The tip is actually to include a noun after it. So if you find that in your essays you say, this means that, or this shows that, make sure that you put a noun after the word this. So let's take a look at an example. The vague wording would be, this shows that while occupations in all fields are projected to increase, jobs in STEM fields will increase significantly more. While that's not necessarily a bad sentence, it would be improved if we were to say this graph or these statistics. Now you might be thinking, okay, but isn't that clear from the previous sentence? And sometimes it is, but sometimes when students are writing, we're not really sure what the this or the that is actually referring to. So to avoid an unclear antecedent, make sure that you put a noun after your demonstrative pronoun, especially when it's at the start of the sentence. So while it is somewhat better to say this graph or these statistics, that's a quick fix. If we add more detail, it makes the response stronger. So look at the one at the bottom. It says, a graph from the U.S. Department of Education reveals that while all fields are projected to increase by 16% between 2010 and 2020, STEM occupations such as biomedical engineers and medical scientists are projected to increase significantly more, 62 and 36% respectively. You can see that the bottom response is much more specific. So not only do we avoid the vague pronoun, but also we have more concrete details to prove the point. Another tip for you is to include specifics from the text. Now, this could be specifics from the sources of a synthesis essay. It could be specifics from the passage and rhetorical analysis. The goal is to choose specific evidence, and you want to think of short quotes. Because remember, the goal of your essay is going to be to have commentary or analysis. So when you have a really long quote, it can be difficult to embed that into a sentence, and sometimes it doesn't sound natural. So choosing a shorter quote makes it easier to weave that phrase into a sentence of your own. I tell my students that a good test for their embedded evidence is that if they were to read the paragraph out loud to somebody who hadn't seen the paragraph, would the person know when they're actually quoting something? If the answer is no, they wouldn't know because it's read so seamlessly, then the evidence is well embedded. However, if they say things like, she says, or according to this source, then it's going to be much more obvious that they're about to quote something. So while those lead-ins are not necessarily wrong, they aren't as effective as embedding the evidence seamlessly. Another reason why you want to include specifics from the text is that you want to remember that the person reading your essay is not supposed to infer. You want to make sure that you're connecting the dots, if you will, for the person reading your essay. Don't just assume that they know. Make sure that your evidence is clear and that it's effectively proving your point. Specific references to the text help you show that you understood the passage. It also helps you avoid generalizing. The next tip for improving your writing is to include strong verbs. Now, there are a few verbs that I tell my students are weak verbs, and those are says, shows, and uses. Generally speaking, these verbs tend to be less effective, and there are better replacements for them. Some verbs that might help you with your commentary would be verbs like conveys, demonstrates, emphasizes, highlights, illustrates, reveals, portrays, suggests, underscores, and there's probably a few more as well. You're welcome to screenshot this if you would like the list. Now, with those commentary verbs, it's helpful to make sure that you're actually using them correctly, because while they all sort of mean shows, some of them are used in very particular instances. And if you're writing a rhetorical analysis essay, you want to be sure to use rhetorically accurate verbs. So for instance, instead of saying the author uses repetition, you might say the author repeats. Rhetorically accurate verbs are a way for you to be more precise, and that way you're better able to convey what the writer is actually doing. A lot of times, students want to use the word says in their essay. So I have a list of verbs here for you that could mean says, but again, you want to make sure that you know the meaning of the word, because some of these words have different uses or connotations. So for instance, the word affirms is not the same as implies. Those are used in different scenarios. So it's important that you're able to understand how to use these verbs correctly. As you're writing, it's important to avoid lower level words. Some that I see quite often are words like good and bad. So I gave you some synonyms here that are stronger. Keep in mind that with these synonyms, it really depends on what you're talking about, which synonym would be most appropriate. And you'll notice that I didn't put positive and negative as synonyms here because while positive is a synonym for good, positive is not necessarily the strongest synonym. I tried to choose ones that I thought would be stronger. And the same with negative. A lot of times students might say something like, the text has a negative tone. And while we do know what you're saying with that, negative is still rather imprecise. My final tip for you is to add adjectives and adverbs to make your writing more precise. This is actually something that I have my students do when they are revising a paragraph or an essay. I tell them to go back in and try to include adjectives or adverbs that will help them better convey their ideas in their essay. I actually have my students do this as part of the revision process, especially in the beginning of the year as they're writing paragraphs and ultimately essays. By including adjectives and adverbs, students are able to be more precise with what they're actually trying to say. And if you do it enough, you start to actually do that as you're writing. And if students do it enough, they actually start to get in the habit of including those adjectives and adverbs in their first draft as they're writing. So here's an example of how you might do this. Let's say you wrote, she asserts that. So you chose a stronger verb than says, which is great. But now we can add in an adverb. So is she being really bold as she's making that assertion? If so, you could say she boldly asserts that. Or if we're talking about facts or statistics, maybe it's that she logically asserts that. Or maybe it's that she emphatically asserts that. Boldly, logically, and emphatically all have different meanings. So if you add that adverb in, it changes the meaning of what you're saying and it makes it more precise. I hope you enjoyed these quick tips to help you avoid vague wording in your writing. If you found this video helpful, please do me a huge favor and hit that like button. Also, don't forget to make sure that you are subscribed with your notifications turned on. That way you don't miss any future videos with writing tips. And if you happen to be checking out this video because you are a student preparing for the AP Lang exam, don't forget that I also post videos over on TikTok. So if you like that form of short content, then definitely give me a follow over there as well. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, happy writing!